Chinese government believes it has a gun. The Chinese communists took power out of the barrel of the gun, so they believe that's the only way to deal with every problem. They used the gun for 65 years to suppress Uyghurs, Tibetans, everybody else. But the problems are not disappearing, they're only getting bigger.
Naming your child is meant to be a source of joy, but for parents in Western China, it's not so straightforward. Xinjiang province is home to around 10 million Muslims, and it's now banned Muslim names it considers extreme. Names like Islam, Hajj, and Saddam. If parents ignore the law, their child can be denied healthcare and schooling. China's Muslim minority, the Uyghur ethnic group, says these are just the latest laws to restrict their rights. Long beards and burqas were recently outlawed, and the authorities track cars that belong to Uyghurs. Well, the government says the measures are aimed at curbing extremism and are part of a campaign against what it sees as a growing insurgency. So, is this a legitimate crackdown on terror or just religious repression? And will the laws only add to people's resentment towards the authorities? Well, to answer these questions, I'm joined by Nuri Turkel. He's a legal advisor to the World Uyghur Congress and chairman of the Uyghur Human Rights Project based in Washington, D.C. Thanks so much for joining us, Nuri. So, is this part of a legitimate war on terror? That's what the Chinese think. Tell me why you disagree.
Since 9/11, Chinese government has opportunistically misused and for its domestic consumption and the international community to claim that they too a victim of terrorism. There's right before 9/11, they claimed that the Chinese controlled area of Xinjiang, East Turkestan, is a safe place and foreign investment should be poured in. So they changed the course. To the Chinese government, Uyghurs' ethno-national identity is a stumbling block for their strategic and deliberate means and policies to dilute, eventually destroy the Uyghurs' centuries-old ethnic and cultural heritage. The recent wave of legislative initiatives and implementation further prove that the Chinese government see Uyghur Islam as a political threat. They have tried for decades, in a similar way that they have done in Tibet, advocating and enforcing and imposing their version of a Chinese culture. The Uyghurs and Tibetans have resisted. And the Chinese government see Tibetan religion and Uyghurs Islamic faith as a major obstacle. And the international community should take some responsibility as well. Some of the Western governments and some of the Muslim governments have been a strange bedfellow with the Chinese.
Let me ask you about that. Nuri, sorry to interrupt you. Let me ask you about that, right? So you mentioned the Tibetans. The Dalai Lama calls it a cultural genocide of Tibetan culture, what's happening there. Many Uyghurs I've spoken to say the same thing is happening in Xinjiang. So you have Tibet. It's very high profile, far higher profile than the situation in Xinjiang. And still, the Tibetans can't really get anything out of it. Nobody wants to fight with the Chinese in the international community, as you say. So what hope is there for the Uyghur Muslims if even the Tibetans can't get anything and they have such a high profile?
At least they have a legislative and societal grassroots support, whereas the Uyghurs have nothing. That's why the Chinese government have been punishing the Uyghurs right and left with impunity. There's no country except for the United States and occasionally Turkey speak out against the Chinese aggression. But because of this intertwined economic relationship that the United States and China have, and also some regional issues that the United States need Chinese help, it has been the human rights issues, particularly the Uyghur human rights issues, have been taken the sidestep, if not completely ignored. But when the Chinese talks to the West, particularly the United States, they focus on counterterrorism efforts. The Chinese claim that the United States has been applying double standard, in which the United States don't see eye to eye when it comes to so-called Uyghur terrorism. And the Chinese are very, very upset about it. And they see some possibilities in the Trump administration because of the North Korea, because of the Syria and other regional conflicts that the United States need Chinese help. So the situation was bad, but it's getting worse both in domestic and international fronts.
Yeah, Nuri, love the motherland and learn Mandarin to help fight the perception that you are terrorists. That's what some members of the Communist Party, Uyghur members of the Communist Party, have been saying in Chinese state media recently, and that's being pushed out. How is that being received by Uyghurs in Xinjiang and Uyghurs in the diaspora? The fact that you have these Uyghurs who are members of the Communist Party saying, hey, be loyal to China.
I can summarize, I can give you 2 sentences to illustrate the lives of the Uyghur people. But one, they feel suffocated. There's nothing that they do seem to be right for the Chinese government. For example, just recently, a cadre, a government official, refused to smoke in front of an elderly religious people. It's a sign of respect that you don't do smoking, drinking in front of elderlies or elderly family members. That person, being a Chinese government official, being disfavored, if not punished. It is there. So few people feel suffocated. They're confused. They don't know what to do and how. Regardless how hard they try to be a good citizen for the Chinese, they're not good enough. And then 2, the Uyghur people feel like they live in an open-air prison. They can move around, they can go to the restaurants to eat, but since they spiritually been so restricted, their daily lives have been watched. If you go to Urumqi, you see nothing but cameras, police cars patrolling around, forced disappearances are common. So the Uyghur people feel suffocated and feel like live in an open-air prison.
I remember speaking to Rabia Kadir, your leader in Washington, D.C. Tell me a little bit about leadership and the fact that, the leadership is very disconnected from what's happening on the ground because she's in exile and there are other Uyghur communities in Germany and elsewhere who claim to be leading the global community. Do the Uyghurs have a leadership problem?
Uyghurs don't have a leadership problem, but but the Chinese government creating some problems. For example, restricting the freedom of movement of the World Uyghur Congress leadership. Luckily, United States government, particularly the Congress, have been very supportive. There are a lot of places that the Uyghur leadership can go and debrief the situation and advise the U.S. government on certain things that need to be done immediately. So Chinese government would like to create crisis, even like to a World Uyghur Congress or like to collapse. That's what they do. Divide and conquer is one of the useful methods for any authoritarian governments to do. Confusing people is another. So they have been successful by using their international influence in diplomatic and economic arena to pressure certain governments to restrain, if not restrict, Uyghur leadership's freedom of movement around the world.
Nuri Turkel, it's been a pleasure talking to you. Thanks so much for taking the time.